Shalom, this is Avraham Shira from Shevat Nar HaShalom B'Yerushalayim. Tu B'Shvat Sameach. It is the holiday entitled the New Year of the Trees. And we're celebrating by making blessings on trees, on fruits, more specifically. And a few words I think are in line to help us understand the depth of Judaism and the depth of why we do what we do and how far it goes, simply taking a piece of fruit and making a blessing on it. And this new year for the trees, well, why a new year for the trees? Well, because we know this time of the year, the sap begins to flow in the tree. And as, of course, it's building towards the spring, towards the creation of new fruit, and by the middle and beginning of the summer, we're going to have whole, complete, ready-to-eat fruit on many trees. So it's the beginning of the life force starting to flow again in the trees. And, of course, Ish Eitz Sadeh, the famous verse that a man is a tree of the field. King Solomon told us this line, and he wasn't just making up nice poetry. There's nothing in the Tanakh that's poetry per se. It might be poetic, but it's really deep metaphysical teachings. A man is a tree of the field, and just like the sap begins to flow in the trees this time of year, so too it begins to flow in the human race as we move towards spring. Because we're moving closer to the sun, but not only, of course, not only that, we're moving closer to the redemption of Egypt, closer to the revelation of the light of creation itself. Now, how does this work? As this sap begins to flow, right, we make a blessing on the tree. Why do I need to bless the tree if the sap is already flowing? Because there were thousands of years where people didn't bless on trees and on fruit. So why do I need to start blessing now? Because the trees were still producing fruit long before the first Jew stood up and made a blessing on a tree. So we know the sap was flowing. The difference is that there's an increase. That there's an increase when a Jew makes a blessing on a fruit or a tree. And this increase is when the Jew gives of his life force through the blessing, the life force transfers to the tree. Now you think this is just metaphysical puzzle building? No, it's not at all. We're part of one unified, integrated system of godly energy, okay? One unified, integrated system of godly energy means when you do something, it reverberates around you. And this increases the flow of life force in the trees. And that's why you'll see some farmers really have great produce and some don't. Because their soul is not contributing to the growth process when the produce is not so good. And the other people that are very connected to what they do, the people that are connected to what they do, their fruit shows the difference. Now, everybody knows that you could tell the chef by their food, how they cook their food, the relationship to the food is in the food. So this flow is in the tree of life itself, and it's also moving through all of humanity. So we call it the tree of life because it's a convenient metaphor to understand the process of how the energy of heaven moves from God to man and from man back to God. Because we have the life force that's coming from the sun, and then we have the energy and the life force of the earth rising from below, and the two are unifying together. Okay, so when we make a blessing, we're kind of like tapping into the system. And the blessing, of course, with Hebrew words, is activating letters of creation that God used to create the world, and is still creating the world. So I ask you an interesting question. Why do some people have a green thumb? Is it more clear now? I remember growing up, my mother had a garden in the back, and it was really amazing how everything was green and beautiful. And my aunt, her sister, she couldn't grow anything. And she would always come over and say, "What a beautiful garden, I can't grow anything." Maybe there's something going on there we don't understand. The life force flowing through one person also connects to the appreciation for the plants, for the trees, for the fruit, etc. And so when you see a green thumb, you see a person who's more connected to the life force. And this life force, of course, we identify as the godly force. And it's not separate, it can't be separate. And anybody who makes a separation between the life force of the planet and the life force of God is really making a separation in the entire universe. And this, in my mind, is a kind of a metaphysical crime, because he's splitting off the forces of the unity into pieces. And that is really against the way the creation is really built. Okay, so there was one person who has a green thumb because he's connected to what he's doing. He's connected. He has positive feelings towards the plants. And we know the scientists have hooked up plants to sensors. And when different types of people enter the room, the plants respond accordingly. So that's also another signifier of the difference of the connection of the person to the life force in the universe, in the tree, and in himself. Okay. So with all that said, I want to share a short story, which is a nice story, because it happened to me that 35 years ago, I was a gardener as a kid, well, a young man, let's say, in a golf course. And a giant oak tree, I mean really big oak tree, that had a 5-foot across trunk. It was struck by lightning in one night, and I got to work in the morning, and the tree was all over the place. It was completely blown apart, except there was this much bark left on the tree. Now we're talking a tree that it would take 4 people to put their arms around it. And there was this much bark left on the tree. So we tried to save the tree. What do? I went out there, I covered it with tar, I covered that with burlap, I covered that with wires, and I put fertilizer all around the entire tree. And we're talking about a tree that had a 20-meter span across. Right, 60-foot span. It was a live oak tree in Orlando, Florida. So, you know, these trees, it's not a little baby sapling. And we're trying to do everything we can to save the tree. And, okay, it takes a long time for such a thing to rebuild itself if it could. I mean, giant pieces of bark were laying all over the ground. And so what happens? I go off, I buy a van, I go travel around America. I find Judaism and God in California. Of all places, right? I lived in New Orleans, in New York, everywhere. I was riding and driving and picking up hitchhikers and having a good time because I wanted to experience life outside the little bubble I'd grown up in. And I ended up in California. I became religious. And then when I came back to Orlando the next time, I said, I've got to go see my tree. I wanted to see if the tree made it. This is 20 years after that lightning struck. And I got to the golf course and I took one of those electric carts, you know, because I had worked there, so I was still friends with the people who owned the place. I took the electric cart. I drove out to I think it was like the 14th hole on the back 9 of the golf course, and there was this giant tree. The entire thing had healed. It had created a whole new ring of bark around the tree. So I thought this was a good metaphor for me in my life because I felt like I'd come back to life through coming back to Hashem and coming back to the Torah and coming back to my Jewish roots. And here was this tree that came back from being struck by lightning. And so it was a good metaphor then. And now here we are on Tu B'Shvat, so many years after, and I'm sure the tree is doing fine because these trees live a lot longer than human beings. And it's an acorn tree, so we don't eat acorns, but our friends the squirrels do. So, you know, it's still a fitting story, I think, for Tu B'Shvat. And we should all have that return to life, return to the sap that flows in the trees, to return to the life force that's flowing through the universe and the tree of life. And we should all be blessed to continue the process of return to life. And check us out on Patreon, on YouTube, and we're there on all those outlets with classes and meditations and poetry, all the different stuff that we're producing. So God bless you on Tu B'Shvat Sameach, and we'll look for you again on Patreon and YouTube. God bless. All the best.